solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Do I need to make a verbal notice of appearance on behalf of my client? I'm Wesley White. I'm a member of the Florida Bar 273392, and I reside and work in Nassau County, Florida. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Morning, sir. State your name.
Ben Kruidbos.
And you're going to need to speak up a little bit if you would. Maybe move that microphone a bit closer. And if you would, spell your last name.
Kruidbos.
And your occupation.
IT Director for the State Attorney's Office, 4th Judicial Circuit.
And if you would, explain to the court what duties are included in that job.
Basically overseeing the IT systems for the State Attorney's Office.
How long have you been there?
4 years as a state employee, and then before that, staffed at the State Attorney's Office through the City of Jacksonville.
Are you then on occasion responsible for case-specific work, such as on a particular file?
Yes.
Does the State Attorney's Office, your State Attorney's Office, have what's known as the Cellebrite software and hardware?
Yes, we do.
You would explain to the court generally what is Cellebrite and what's its purpose.
Cellebrite is a company that makes a forensic device for downloading the contents of a cell phone, and then the software applications that comes with it would be Physical Analyzer. That's the software that's used to open the dump of the phone, which would be the source file.
And on occasions in the past, have you done such a download or a dump of information on other cases?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Do you know how long the State Attorney's Office has had that software? Hardware?
Not off the top of my head, no. But
Is it before February 2012 or after?
I'm guessing it would probably be around then.
Do you know the cost of that software and hardware?
I believe the system, I'm pretty sure we paid close to $8,000 for the system, if I remember correctly.
And that's for the law enforcement version, is it not?
I believe ours is the law enforcement version.
Did you, as part of your duties, then undertake a review of any of the information in the State versus Zimmerman matter?
Yes, I did.
And if you would, tell us what that included.
Initially, the report that was generated by FDLE, I was asked to print it because there was a problem with the actual file printing.
Do you recall the timeline for printing that initial report?
It would have been late 2012 or early 2013.
Okay. And did you actually print the report?
Yes, we did get the report printed.
And did you do any other work on either that report or the underlying data?
We had requested the source file as per my recommendation because I didn't feel the report was conclusive.
Okay. If you would, then explain to the court, firstly, what is the report itself and what would it contain?
The report is basically step 2 of the process. Step 1 would be plugging in the phone and then forensically downloading the contents of the telephone. From then, that file is then opened in the Physical Analyzer software. The generate report function is then performed, and the output is basically the report that I printed that I just mentioned.
And about how long was that report? How many pages?
Approximately 900 pages, if I remember.
Sorry, approximately.
Approximately 900 pages, if I remember.
And what does a report like that contain within it?
It should contain the contents of the source file.
And so we can get sort of specific, if I were to hand you a Physical Analyzer 900-page report and we looked through it, what would it show us?
All of the information that's contained on the phone, from text messages to MMS to location services, images that were on the phone, videos.
In effect, every piece of data that's on the phone downloads through Physical Analyzer and then into a report, an easily readable report. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That would include what type of, when you say images, what do you mean by images?
Images would include both images that were, if it's a smartphone, it would be images that were viewed on the screen as you're browsing, and also images that were either sent to you that you saved to your camera roll or photos that you would have taken from that phone.
And the camera itself, and therefore the report, actually distinguishes between those three types of images, does it not?
There is indications in there, yes.
So you can look at the report and know if it was a picture that was taken by the camera as compared to one that was viewed on an internet site, correct?
I think that you could tell by the file name, yes.
Okay. Similarly, there are what's known as thumbnails that also show up as images on the report, correct?
There are, yes.
And those thumbnails are just very small, discrete images that may be pulled from an internet site and kept in a different style of image, correct?
It's still an image, it's just it's smaller, and I think it's a different file name.
In addition to the images, then, you had mentioned GPS information. Would you tell us what that is?
There's in most cell phones, there's a GPS function. There's also the information that's saved as far as the cellular towers.
So in effect, on a phone, there is some information, is there not, that can give us some insight as to where a phone may have been. Would that be accurate?
That is correct.
There are some limitations, are there not? The GPS must be activated and active in order to gather the information, correct?
Correct. The GPS on a phone, it's my understanding, doesn't run every moment that the phone is on. I think that it's only used when a certain function in the phone needs the GPS information. So it's not uncommon to miss a day or two of GPS information.
And you mentioned text messages as well. The phone retains text messages,
Yes, it does.
both outgoing and incoming,
Yes, it does.
and it also can retain or document websites that have been visited. Is that accurate?
It does, yes.
And such matters as Facebook. Would it also be able to capture and retain Facebook information if the phone or a user of the phone were to access Facebook or actually utilize Facebook through the phone?
Depending on the algorithm that was used in programming that phone, most phones do store that information.
Okay. You had mentioned a moment ago that when you had printed out this 900-page report that you had concerns. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What were those concerns?
My concerns were the structure of the files, the file sizes in the images folder, and the fact that I didn't see any recovered deleted information led me to believe that there was more information on the source file, and I was concerned that my attorney would get into court and not have that information. So I requested the source file.
Normally, is it normal in your work through Cellebrite and other forensic software looking at cell phones that there is often information contained in the data or source file that has been deleted or somehow removed?
That's what I've seen in the times that I've done it, yes.
And that information, though deleted by the user, is never actually gone from the phone. It's just in a different space.
Yes.
When I use the wrong terms, feel free to correct me, because this is your area, not mine.
Okay.
So if I'm not saying it right, tell me.
Basically, what ends up happening is when a file is written to a hard drive, whether it's a cell phone or a computer, the file is actually written on the hard drive. It's then put in a directory so that when you search for that file, it's available to you. When you delete that file, basically all you're deleting is the entry in the directory. The file is still on the hard drive. It does free up that space, and it then can be written over. So that's why it's not uncommon to recover some deleted messages, but not others. It depends on how the hard drive was rewritten over.
And forensic software, such as Cellebrite and Encase and others, specifically look to retrieve deleted messages and or hidden files. Is that accurate?
It's my understanding that they do a complete dump of the phone, including everything, including deleted messages.
So when this concern came to you about the fact that your attorneys may not have had the full information, what did you do?
I notified the investigator, and then
And as we go through this, if I might interrupt you for a moment, I'm going to ask you to, as best you can, tell us the names of the people so that we know who's involved and can keep track rather than we go through 2 or 3 investigators or 2 or 3 attorneys. It's going to get confusing.
okay.
The investigator that you spoke to?
I told Investigator T.C. Osteen I was concerned that the file was not complete. The other thing I noted at the time was that if I had the source file, rather than print the report, I would be able to export the specific modules, whether it be SMS, MMS, location services, to an Excel spreadsheet, which would be easier for them to filter through the information.
In effect, once you have the source file, you could do what Cellebrite would do or anybody else with the Cellebrite software and hardware, correct?
Once you have the source file, you need the physical analyzer application that comes with the Cellebrite system in order to open that.
The source file, is that called the bin file?
I think it's UFD.
If we have maybe erroneously identified the source file, that being the binary file, all the information, as the bin file, is that a name it might be called?
Yes.
Okay. If I use the word bin file, I'll try not to. I'll try and use the UFD from now on. But if I revert to bin file, we're talking about the same file. Is that accurate?
It's understandable.
Okay. So the bin file, in and of itself, is worthless forensically, is it not?
You would need the software to open it.
And the $8,000 software?
I think $8,000 was the total that we paid for the entire system, including the hardware.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how much the actual software is.
In effect, the bin file are really zeros and ones, are they not?
Actually haven't looked at the structure of the UFD file, so I'm not sure. I would venture to say that it is binary.
Okay. And if a series of numbers or symbols that cannot be viewed unless something can interpret it, like Cellebrite.
That's my understanding, yes.
And you asked to try to, what you got was initially what you had, the report you filled out was just, you know where that came from?
The report that
Yes.
original report, it was my understanding it came from FDLE.
In effect, what you got was either a PDF or some form of the actual report itself, correct?
No, the report that was given to us is performed by the generate report function within Physical Analyzer. So what it ends up doing is it creates a folder, and in that folder are a series of subfolders with images, videos, and other information that's kept on that. All of that is referenced in a PDF file, I believe it's called report.
Okay. Did you sought to get a copy of the source file, is that correct?
I mentioned to the investigator that I had concerns that we didn't have all of the information.
And what did he say?
Let's call Bernie.
Okay. And then what happened?
We called him, I believe, from my desk phone.
And when you say him, you mean Bernie Del Rionda here in the courtroom?
Yes, sir.
And tell me of that conversation.
Basically, we tried to explain it. I think he was in the car, so we said that we would come and see him the following morning.
And again, are we still not talking about the end of 2012, early 2013, or?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And did you in fact meet with Mr. Del Rionda at some point the following day?
I'm not sure if it was the following day, but it was shortly thereafter. Investigator Osteen and I went to his office, and I explained to him that I had concerns that all of the information was not there.
And at that point, was that based solely on your concern that there were no deleted files or nothing that would suggest that this was a complete report?
At this point, it was completely a hunch on my part, just based off of what I had seen from doing phones before that.
Okay. And Mr. Del Rionda's response?
We can call FDLE and request it.
Okay. And was that done?
Yes.
And at some point then, do you know who you spoke to at FDLE?
I cannot recall the gentleman's name.
Okay. At some point then, did you receive the source file?
Yes, shortly thereafter, Investigator Osteen came to my office and said that he had the source file.
And what then happened with the source file?
The first thing I did is I put it in my computer and looked at the properties of the UFD file and noticed that it was 2.3 gigs compared to the 100 megs of the original report.
The initial 900-page report that you had took up the space of 100 megabytes?
The entire folder structure, including the report that encapsulates the 100-page or the 900-page report, was approximately 100 megs.
And the source file that you retrieved was 23 times that in size. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What did that indicate to you?
That the report was not inclusive of everything that was on the source file.
So what did you do?
At that point, I explained to Investigator Osteen that the physical analyzer software would need some time to run. And before he left, I tried to open it, and I noticed that the modules at the bottom of the window did not pop up. So he mentioned that when we called FDLE the first time to request the source file, the gentleman had said to call him back and he would let us know what to do to get it to open. We called him back and he mentioned that there were 2 plugins within the physical analyzer software that were required for that phone type. So we ran those plugins and that essentially populated all the data to the phone.
Okay. And that person at FDLE, do you know his name to be Steve Brenton?
I can't recall his name, I'm sorry.
Have you met him here in the courtroom on the gray suit, glasses?
No.
Okay. When you say it populated all the data, does that mean that an additional report was then available?
What that means is basically when you open up a UFD file in Physical Analyzer, all of the information on the phone should be readily available to you. So after I ran those 2 plugins, all of the information was then available.
And again, the timing of this?
The timing?
The timing of when, January, or when was this, December?
It was early January.
Okay. 2013.
2013.
And what, in effect, what was the difference in the 2 reports that have been generated, one by FDLE and yours?
I used the Generate Report feature in Physical Analyzer, and I reran the report. It took a number of hours to run. Once it was complete, it created a folder with all of the same information. The total file size for everything was 3.5 gigs approximately.
As compared to the 100 gigs that made up the previous report and file structure?
100 megabytes.
Yes, I said gigs, didn't I? Apologize. 100 megabytes. The initial report, this is now the report generated with the source file that you did, was 3.5 gigabytes, or 35 times the size of the data file and structure for the first report. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do with that information?
At that point, I called Investigator Osteen back down, and we started to review the information. Specifically, the photos, as I had noted before, that the photos that were on the original report were all very small. They were thumbnail size. So, and we noticed that there was additional photos in there. I think at that point I showed him how to tell which ones had been deleted, as it's notated in the Physical Analyzer software. And I also showed him the export to Excel feature and exported the submodules, SMS, which would be text messages, MMS, Facebook, location services, exported those to Excel. And at that point, basically, I created 4 folders in a separate subfolder. I copied over the original source file, the 100 meg report, the 3.5 gig report that I had run, and also the Excel exports. So basically, there was a folder with 4 subfolders in there, with those things in there.
Okay, backing up just a little bit.
Okay.
The report that you generated, you noticed it had significant more images than the first report?
Yes, sir.
And similarly, it had significant amount of deleted images or text messages or other data streams?
I believe I saw more images that had been deleted, yes.
Do you have in your memory now a comparison as to how many pictures are in the first report compared to how many are in the second?
In the first report, there was 2,958 photos with a total file size of 16 megs. The report that I ran had a total number of 4,275 with a total file size of 95, approximately.
The 16 meg file with the 2,500, those were mostly, as you testified, to thumbnails?
2,958. Most of those were very small images, yes, sir.
Okay. The second file, comparing the two reports, had about 5 times the volume, correct? 16 megs to 95 megs. Is that accurate?
Approximately.
And almost doubled the amount of images, correct? Not quite.
It was about 1,000 more.
Okay. And aside from the images now, going to the text messages, was there a differential between the first report text messages and the second report?
It's hard because there was so many text messages. I did notice that there were deleted text messages that I saw more readily in the report that I had run. And as we were skimming through the text messages, I believe Investigator Osteen pointed out that it sounded like there was a transaction for a firearm.
What did he say?
It looks like they're selling a gun.
Those words?
I think that was pretty close.
In addition to that comment, did Mr. Osteen make any comments about the other information that was now apparent in the second report that was not apparent in the first report, or wasn't present in the first report?
He said that we needed to go and see Bernie.
There has been some testimony concerning additional pictures regarding specific items. Did you have any conversation with Mr. Osteen about any additional pictures as opposed to the one comment about the text messages?
Yes, sir. We looked through the images. There were images of Trayvon Martin blowing smoke. There was images of pot plants. There was an image of a hand holding a gun. There was an image of a gun on a bed. There was images of what appeared to be underage females that were naked. And there were images of a clump of jewelry on a bed. I think the quilt was red, if I remember correctly.
According to what?
The quilt.
The quilt, okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't
red,
hear
if
you.
I remember correctly.
Okay, apologize, I couldn't hear what you said. So, Mr. Osteen said we need to talk to Bernie.
We need to go see Bernie, yes.
And then what happened?
Him and I went up to Bernie's office where we made him aware that the source file that we had opened had additional images on there.
And again, the timing of this conversation approximately?
Early January 2013.
And tell me of that conversation. What did Mr. Rionda say in response to that?
He said, well, if the information exists, then we have to deal with it.
Okay. And then tell me what else he said, if anything.
I think I had a conversation with him as to how I initially when Investigator Osteen mentioned the images that we had seen, and I mentioned that it looked like Trayvon Martin was holding a handgun in his right hand. He said, well, how do you know it's Trayvon Martin's hand? And I said, it's an assumption based on the file, the file name that image was named. It looked like that would have come from that phone's camera. And I held up my right hand with the gun, and then I held up my left hand as it was holding a camera, as you would if you were trying to take a photo of a gun that you were holding.
What was his response?
You can't see anything else but that.
Okay. Any other conversation during that initial meeting with the new source file report?
No, I think that was pretty close to it.
What then next did you have to do regarding that report or this case?
At that point, basically, I went back to my office and I printed the Excel spreadsheets that those specific modules were on, and then I index tabbed them, and that was it.
And just so we're clear as far as what Excel spreadsheets are, the report itself outlines in the 900 pages all of the text messages, is that correct? All of the images, is that correct? And everything else that's on the phone in various categories.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in the physical analyzer software, you can separate those categories and export those to an Excel spreadsheet.
So in effect, you could take all of the images, all of the deleted images if you wanted, and move them from the data that created the report into an Excel spreadsheet, right?
I think at that point, with the export feature, I think that it's all or nothing. I think you export to Excel the text messages.
Okay. So all of the images would then go on an Excel spreadsheet, potentially. Is that accurate?
Not so much the images, but the text messages. The images are contained in a folder.
So this would then be sort of a sub-report that would outline all of the text messages in or out, deleted or not. Is that accurate?
For the most part, yes.
And you had performed and created all of those reports on behalf of the state attorney's office, correct?
I did, yes.
Okay. Then what next did you accomplish?
At that point, I copied the folder that had the 4 subfolders, the one folder that contained the original source file, the one folder that contained the 100 meg report from FDLE that we had originally received, the 3.5 gig report that I did, and then the additional folder that contained those Excel spreadsheets. I copied those to a flash drive, and I put it in the box that contained the 900-page report.
Okay. And what did you do with that?
Brought it to Bernie Dealer Rionda's office.
Okay. Did you talk to him about it?
I believe I told him that that's what was contained in there.
Okay. Any further conversation that day about delivering to him all of those reports and the flash drive that had it all in digital format?
I asked him what happens now, and he said that FDLE would have to redo their report to match ours.
What else did he tell you about that next step?
That was it.
Did he have any concern with you being involved in the process of having to testify?
He said so that I wouldn't have to testify.
When you handed this thumb drive to Mr. De La Rionda, did he seem to know what it was?
It was in a box with a 900-page report.
Okay.
I told him where it was, and I think I put it on the round table in his office.
Did he seem, from your past experience with him, to know what a thumb drive is?
He knew what a thumb drive was.
Does he know from your past experience, does he know what a JPEG is?
I'm not sure if I don't know.
After he said he was going to have FDLE do the report, what other next conversation you had with him?
I believe I got called back up to the office again by Investigator Osteen, and I explained again the process of forensically downloading the information on a cell phone. And I explained it in steps, being as step 1 being the source file, step 2 the report, and then step 3 is exporting those features into Excel so that you could filter them easily.
Okay.
He initially sounded confused, and he said, so we have 2 step 3s. And I said, no, we have 2 step 2s. The report that FDLE ran, the report that I ran, both driven from the source file, which would be step 1, and then step 3, which is me exporting to Excel.
Okay.
And then I asked him if he understood, and he said, yes, I understand.
Okay. What other conversation did you have with him at that point?
Pretty sure I asked again whether or not FDLE, what would happen, and FDLE, if FDLE would have to redo my report. And I believe it was indicated that they would.
Did he talk to you at all about forwarding any information to the defense?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Was there ever a conversation did you have another conversation with Mr. De La Rionda about this event after that one?
About this event being the cell phone?
The generation of this new report and the uncovering of more information off the phone.
Could you please clarify, because correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the witness testified the last conversation was between him and Mr. Osteen.
Okay, let me clarify. My understanding was that, just to back up a bit so that I don't confuse you or myself, you brought the file up to Mr. De La Rionda's office with the written report or the paper report and the thumb drive. And then I said, did you have another conversation? I may have misspoke if I thought you said you had that with Mr. De La Rionda. Who did you have that next conversation with? So here's the question. You you brought up the report, you left, you may have had a conversation with Mr. De La Rionda about forwarding it to FDLE. Then there was another conversation you had. Just start again with that one and tell us who was involved in that.
The other conversation that I had is when I got called back up by Investigator Osteen to Mr. De La Rionda's office.
And who was there?
The two of them initially, and I explained it again, and he called John Guy in his office so that I could explain it once more.
So Mr. Guy was present for at least part of this conversation regarding the existence of this other information having now been distilled out of the phone?
As I recall, yes.
Any further conversation in that conversation?
I believe after Mr. Guy left is when I asked once more what would end up happening, and he said, I can't recall if it was that conversation or the one right after where he mentioned that that we could send the source file to defense, and I'm pretty sure it took place in his office because I remember standing in front of his desk and him walking around his desk as he said it, and as he was sitting down, he asked me how much the Cellebrite system was, and I said $8,000.
And what did he say?
I don't recall what he said.
Okay. You now call it source file. So the source file is the same as I'm calling it bin file, and we're also calling it UFD, correct?
Same thing.
It is still the binary file, the zeros and ones. So,
Correct.
okay. And did Mr. De La Rionda say anything like the defense can go out and buy their own Cellebrite? When the conversation was wrapped around how much would it cost?
He may have, but I don't recall that.
Okay. But he did ask you what the cost would be for someone who doesn't already have the software and hardware to accomplish the report that you accomplished for him.
Yes.
You had now mentioned you thought you may have had another conversation. If you would go over that, please.
The next conversation, I believe I was called up to explain the location services portion of the report. And
who was present during that conversation?
I'm not, Mr. De La Rionda, and I'm not sure if Investigator Osteen was in the room as I explained it, but it's my understanding, if I remember correctly, Investigator Osteen came to my office and asked me some questions on location services. I brought up the Excel spreadsheet of that portion of the report, and we looked at the points where it was missing data. And I tried to explain it as best as I possibly could that the GPS function was not recording data the entire time. Obviously, it would kill your battery if it did. So at that point, we went up to Mr. De La Rionda's office, and we explained to him that the location services that are in the that's actually in the phone does not record data every moment of every day.
Okay. And you had actually created that same type of Excel spreadsheet as to the GPS data information as one of the 4 reports that you had done a week or so before, correct?
I believe so.
And that was the one that you discussed with Mr. Osteen when he first asked you?
Correct.
And there was also one of those, was one of the reports that you forwarded to Mr. De La Rionda the week prior when you went to his office and dropped off the reports.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I'll try again, I apologize. When you dropped off the box of reports in thumb drive, one of those reports was the GPS Excel spreadsheet, was it not?
Correct.
Okay. Any further conversation during the meeting regarding the GPS data?
No, it was just an explanation of how the GPS function in a phone works.
What was the next time that you talked to or spoke with any other coworkers at the state attorney's office in this regard?
I think, I'm not sure if it was before or after the explanation on the location services. At that point, I had mentioned to my boss at the time, Rich Commando, that I had suspected that the report was not conclusive of everything. And I had concerns that we wouldn't have had all the information that was on the phone, and you would have found it. And I told him, I said, when I got the file, it was 2.3 gigs, 23 times the size.
Okay, what did he say?
It's a good find.
Anything else with Mr. Commando about this?
No.
Okay. Is he still with the office?
No, sir.
Any further communication or contact regarding this event we're talking about with either Mr. Rionda, Mr. Guy, Mr. Osteen, or any other people from the state attorney's office?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Did you ever find out whether or not FDLE had actually prepared an additional report?
No.
Did you make any other inquiries in regard to whether or not FDLE had made that report?
No.
Did anyone ever tell you that a report has now been generated, you don't need to worry about testifying, we have everything covered?
Excuse me, let me back up one more time.
Sure.
Yes, I did. On May 24th, when I met with Bernie, I asked him at that point if the report, if FDLE had redone the report. He responded yes. Him and John Guy had met with the FDLE person in Burger King.
That's May 24th of this year.
2013, yes.
And I just want to make sure that we're not bypassing a couple of months, because I think we were in the end of January, beginning of February timeline when you were testifying. Is that accurate?
Right.
Between the end of February, when you had that last conversation, the beginning of February, when you had that last conversation, did you ever talk to Mr. Rionda about the FDLE report or anything having to do with the source file in regard to Trayvon Martin's phone?
We may have, but I don't recall.
Nothing of any significance.
I don't think so.
How about to Mr. Osteen?
Not that I recall.
Or Mr. Guy?
No, not that I recall.
Did you do any other inquiries on your own or any other work, or did you review the file again or look at the file after you turned it over to Mr. Rionda?
I think I had it open for about a week after that, and looked through it. But I mean, other than, not really.
There are certain, as you mentioned, plugins that actually allow access to certain groups of data. Would that be an accurate characterization of what a plugin does?
Yes.
Okay. So that if you don't have the right plugins, you might not get all the GPS data if you don't know to look for it.
What I noticed with the two plugins that we ran is there was very little data initially, and then when the two plugins were run in sequence, they populated all the data.
And without those plugins and not knowing to actually do that, that data would not be found, correct?
That's something I didn't simulate that.
Okay. Matter of fact, there may be plugins created yesterday or today that would allow access to other data not accessible 3 days ago, correct?
Not that I know of.
Well, no, I'm saying, not that they exist, but they could. It's an ongoing process, is it not?
That's true.
And before those two plugins were created, however many months or years ago they were, that information wasn't available, was it?
No, the Cellebrite software is evolving. They have updates all the time.
And you have the most updated software, do you not?
I think at the time we ran it, yes.
You were then talking about May 24th and your conversation with Mr. Rionda.
Yes.
What did you ask him?
He called the night before, or actually Jacqueline Bernard had called me the night before saying that he had experienced some computer problems and he had questions on the cell phone information. I didn't get to him till the following morning, and he said that defense was saying that they had not received everything that that was out there. That was when I asked him if FDLE had rerun the report. He said, yes, John Guy and I met with him in Burger King. And Investigator Osteen was there, and he had some printed out reports with a name, I think it was Lavandia or something like that, next to a phone number. And as we brought those up on his computer and used the filter feature in Excel, we did not see those text messages. At that point, I did notice that the file name at the top of the reports that you submitted in your, I guess your discovery, had .db at the end of them, which basically, in my understanding, is a database file. So pretty much at that point, TC and I, or Investigator Osteen and I, relocated to his office and reviewed on his computer that file and tried to find those text messages. He said that he was leaving soon, so I went back down to my office to look over the files.
And have you ever seen this report from FDLE that Mr. Rionda told you was created before May 24th of 2013?
No.
Did you ever ask to see it?
No.
There have been questions about why you came forward and disclosed this information. So let me just ask you, first, when did you decide to disclose this concern about the report?
Probably by late March, early April, I had concerns that the information had not been turned over. I didn't have any reason to believe one way or the other. I knew that the information existed, and I had been told two different things by Mr. Rionda. One, that FDLE would redo the report and the information would be provided, and then in a second one, that only the source file would be provided. I knew at least one of those approaches was probably inaccurate or wrong. At that point, the more that I thought about it, I was curious if I had any legal exposure. And at that point, I sought counsel.
Was your concern that being part of a group of individuals who may have failed to forward information to the defense that you would be held responsible as well?
I don't forward any discovery to attorneys. So I'm not the person that does that. However, if it was brought to light that information should have been shared that we knew about it, I'm pretty sure that I suspected that everyone involved would probably be in trouble to some degree.
Including you?
Including, yeah. That's primarily who I was concerned about.
And is that why you sought counsel?
That is, yes.
And that was Mr. White, who's now in the courtroom, correct?
Correct.
You weren't here for his testimony, but did you give him information, sort of tip of the iceberg information regarding text messages and a few pictures that you thought to be significant and questioned whether or not they had been forwarded to the defense?
When I had retained him as counsel, I explained that there was information on the cell phone that I believed was not turned over. and I described, I think, the 4 photos to him that I had seen. Or I'm sorry, the 3 photos and the deleted text messages that were recovered from my report.
Questions have been raised about Mr. White's bias. Why did you pick Mr. White as your potential counsel or go-to person?
He's a good lawyer.
Any other reason?
Pretty much what I was looking for.
Were you concerned, or did you believe that maybe Mr. White had an axe to grind against the state attorney's office and that you could use that animosity to your benefit?
No.
Did you even know whether or not Mr. White has some axe to grind or concern with the people who remain in the state attorney's office?
I had suspected, yes.
What do you mean by that?
He had sent an email upon his departure that, saying that he was just not happy and moving on.
Did that play at all into your decision to go to Mr. White to seek legal counsel as opposed to anybody else?
No.
Is there any other reason, aside from your potential liability, that you decided to come forward and disclose this information that you knew?
No, I was concerned for my legal exposure.
Do you have any axe to grind with Mr. Rionda or Ms. Corey or anybody else in the state attorney's office?
No.
Were they getting ready to fire you or let you go or anything like that?
I had no knowledge of that.
I mean, before this.
No.
Okay. Any other unspoken reason why you would come forward and disclose this information?
Not that I can think of.
Anything at all? You're the one who would have had the unspoken reason.
No.
Okay. Did you find out that the information had in fact not been forwarded from the state attorney's office to the defense?
After I had retained Mr. White, he said that he had made contact with you, and you represented that you had not received the information.
What concerns do you have now that you have taken the path of disclosing this information
From
personally?
personally, that I'll lose my job?
Do you think that that potential was worth the risk you took in disclosing it?
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
I think all of the information being shared is important in the process to make sure that it's a fair trial.
A moment, John. Thank you. I have no further questions. Your Honor, we may approach for a moment.
I may proceed, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Kruibdos.
Good morning, sir.
Let's start regarding the evidence. Let's make sure everybody understands, more specifically the judge. The bin that we're talking about, all the data that dumped from Mr. Trayvon Martin's phone was turned over to the defense, correct? All of it.
Sir, I don't know what was turned over to the defense.
Well, I guess that's really what I'm trying to ask you.
Okay.
Why would you make an allegation if you don't know what was turned over to the defense?
I was concerned for my legal exposure if it had not been.
So you assumed that maybe it had not been turned over, correct?
I didn't assume. I was concerned for my legal exposure.
So if you didn't know it had not been turned over, wouldn't it be fair to call that an assumption that you didn't know for sure, right?
I did not know for sure, no.
Okay, all right. Let's get to the heart of the matter here. We've got a data that is a dump, I'm going to call it. Is that incorrect to call it that? From the phone, correct?
That would be the source file, yes.
That's the source file. Everything is dumped in there. And then from that, reports could be generated, correct?
Correct?
But all the data itself is in one source, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you have no evidence to the contrary that that evidence, that data, was turned over to the defense?
No, I don't.
Okay. Would it surprise you that in a deposition in Miami on April 25th, the defense asked the witnesses about this gun allegedly being bought or not? The defense showed a witness who was placed under oath, the defense did, Mr. O'Mara or Mr. West, a witness about that gun and asked about the text messages regarding guns. You weren't aware of that, were you?
I was not aware of that.
Doesn't that call into question as to your knowledge as to whether these documents had been turned over to the defense or not?
I don't understand the question.
You're alleging, or you speculated, that this evidence had not been turned over, correct? That was your concern.
That was my concern.
You were concerned about criminal liability, that this evidence had not been turned over, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, for purpose of the record, you never spoke to me or Ms. Corey or anybody, or Mr. Guy or Mr. Manti or Mr. Osteen about the fact that you had gone to West White about this, correct?
No.
Right? That was a secret. Was it not true? You didn't come tell me.
No, I did not.
You didn't tell anybody in the office.
No.
Okay. So how would Mr. O'Mara have had knowledge about this gun and the text messages about this alleged thing about buying a gun or selling a gun or something on April 25th of 2012 in a deposition of a witness if he didn't have the information already?
I mean, obviously you would have sent him the source file.
Oh, okay. So he may have had it. He may have had all the information that you're speculating about he may not have had.
The information that you're referring to is in the source file. The information that I was concerned about was in the report that I generated from the source file.
Right, but one of the items you mentioned was this text about a gun, correct?
Yes.
That you were concerned about that Mr. O'Mara didn't have, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you weren't aware that Mr. O'Mara asked a witness on April 25th in a deposition in Miami about this?
I was not, no.
Wouldn't you agree that assumptions are a bad thing in terms of we can all assume things, but reality is what's important? The truth is what's important, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you did say that at the very end of your testimony, that you believe in a fair trial, right?
I do.
You don't believe in people being sandbagged, correct?
Correct.
Yet you suspected something was up and you never came to me or to Mr. Guy or more importantly to my boss, Ms. Corey.
Your Honor, I have to object. He's being argumentative and he's being repetitious. He's already asked these very questions of my client.
Stop one at a time. Court reporter can only take one at a time. Please tone down your questions.
I'll be glad to. You never spoke to me or Mr. Guy or Mr. Manti that you were aware involved in the case, and more importantly to my boss, Ms. Corey, correct? About these concerns you had.
Correct.
Correct? And by the way, you had it in the past, you had Ms. Corey had an open door policy. You could come in at any time and talk to her, correct?
Given your relationship with Ms. Corey, I did not feel comfortable questioning your handling of evidence.
Are you implying that I've mishandled evidence before?
No, I'm not implying anything. You asked if Ms. Corey had an open door. I was not comfortable given the set of circumstances.
But isn't it true, as you've already stated, that I specifically told you that this evidence would be taken to FDLE in terms of your information also, as you stated, in terms of given to FDLE, correct?
You told me that originally, yes.
Right? And I told you that Mr. Guy and I met with Mr. Brent at Burger King after Burger King, I think it was off of I-4, but I don't know if I told you the specific address, but in Burger King near Sanford, and we turned over all that evidence, correct?
You said Burger King.
Okay. But my point is, I told you this before I knew that there was any allegation that you were going to go tell Mr. White that the defense, that I had done something improper, right?
Your Honor, I object that it's a mischaracterization of his testimony. Pardon me, Your Honor. He's not said that Mr. De La Ronda did anything wrong. He said he had a question about whether it happened or not.
Any objections in my courtroom?
I apologize.
You may not have been here when I had announced that, so I'm telling you now. What is your legal objection, sir?
It's argumentative, Your Honor. There's no foundation for it.
If the witness needs to correct anything, that's the premise for the question.
Okay. Please repeat the question.
I'll try. The statement that you talked about already on direct, where you mentioned that I told you that Mr. Guy and I met with Mr. Britton and turned over all the evidence, including your information that you had developed, to Mr. Britton. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
That
was on the
occurred.
24th.
I'm sorry. I told you that on May 24th,
Right.
correct? As best as you can recall that, the date.
Best as I can recall, I think that's the date.
You're not saying that that's the date I turned it over to Mr. Britton?
No, that's the date
Okay.
that you told me that you had met with him at Burger King.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. To make it clear, I didn't tell you that on that date I turned it over to Mr. Britton.
No, you did not say that.
Okay. Would it surprise you that it was turned over on February 22nd? Your report to Mr. Britton? Or earlier than that? Let's make sure. Is your answer you would not be surprised or you would be surprised?
I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay, I apologize. I didn't mean to
I'm sorry,
confuse you.
Your Honor, I have to ask for clarification because now I'm completely confused. What evidence he's talking about, given to whom, on what date?
He may ask his question again. I have what I wrote in my notes, but his question is not.
Okay. You mentioned that I told you, you believed on May 20, I'm sorry, you said May 24th or,
May 24th
okay, of this year.
was when you mentioned Burger King.
Okay. And
Yes.
that came up because I told you that Mr. Guy and I had met with Mr. Britton and had gone over all the evidence that you had recovered from the source file or whatever to Mr. Britton, correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay. I never told you that we were going to hide the evidence at all, did I?
What you said was, we will send them just the source file.
Did I not tell you that we were turning it over to FDLE, specifically Mr. Britton, and Mr. Britton was the expert in this case and would be testifying because he was a forensic expert?
I'm sorry.
Did I not tell you that the evidence that you got was going to be turned over to FDLE, Mr. Britton, so that Mr. Britton would be the witness that would be testifying at trial or would be deposed regarding this matter?
Yes, and
Okay.
then after that, you told me that we were only going to turn over the source file, and then you asked me how much the Cellebrite system costed.
So are you saying that I told you we were going to hide that from the defense even though I was going to give it to Mr. Britton?
I never heard you say the word hide.
Well, what are you implying by your statement?
That I had an understanding that one thing was going to happen, and then I had an understanding that something different was going to happen.
So I told you,
I'm sorry, Your Honor, if he might be able to finish his answer. I think he was in the middle of it.
At which point, that's what gave me concern that I might have legal exposure.
So are you stating, I mean, make the accusation if you would, please. Are you saying that I told you we were going to hide the evidence from the defense?
I'll object that was asked and answered now.
I mean, I'm just trying to clarify here. We're seeking the truth here. What are you implying or what are you stating that I said?
Basically that you said two different things, and I wasn't sure which one was correct.
Okay, and did you ask for a clarification? Assuming I said two different things, did you ask for a clarification?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. But just to make sure everything is clear, I told you, did I not, without knowing that you were talking to Mr. White or anybody, that evidence had been turned over to Mr. Britton, correct? At Burger King.
At Burger King, yes.
You mentioned you worked with Cellebrite. Now, you have not testified as an expert in court, have you?
No, sir.
Okay. In any court in terms of an expert, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. And what happened in this case, I think you've mentioned it already, we had gotten the evidence from Mr. Britton, correct? As far as you knew, we had gotten from FDLE. I don't know if you knew the name of the analyst. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And when we got the evidence that Mr. Britton or the FDLE analyst got, we weren't able to print it out. I think we showed it to you on the computer, but we couldn't print it out. And that's when we asked you just to print it out,
Correct.
right? And you were going to assist us in printing it out,
Correct.
right? And then you couldn't figure out quickly how to print it out. You said, let me take it to my office and I'll figure it out.
Correct.
Is that accurate?
I believe I did it from my office, yes.
Right? And you ended up printing it out for us.
Yes.
Okay. And then in the process of doing that, you also said in reworking or whatever, I think there may be more information in this, correct?
Yes.
In the source file, correct? Is that correct?
Correct.
And then you didn't know how to open up or how to do the plugin, so we had to call Mr. Britton, who had knowledge of that, because he had actually gone up to New Jersey with Cellebrite, and he told you how to open it up.
I think you're skipping a few steps. You're talking about the original 900-page report, which is the generate report output. Then you jumped to the source file and using the plugins in order to open the source file. Those are two completely separate things.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to make it quicker, but I mean, we can go through all the process, but my point is, you went and got it and you generated your report. We can go through the whole steps. My point is, originally you were tasked with printing out the report,
Correct.
right, that FDLE had prepared.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, and then you did some work on it on your own.
No, sir. The 900-page report, we went to you to request that the source file be provided. That's when we called.
From FDLE, I'm sorry, from Mr.
When we
Brett,
called
you're right.
FDLE.
Right.
And then
We
once
got it.
FDLE got it, it was brought to my office by TC Osteen.
Because you originally did not have the source or the dump. You only had the report that Mr. Bretton had prepared,
Correct.
right? And then once we got you the dump, right?
Right.
Because you determined, my recollection is that it would be easier to print it if you had the dump itself.
Right.
I'm calling it a dump, maybe the bin file or whatever.
That's
Is that
good.
accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, and so when you did that, then you ran a report of yourself and you determined that there was more on what you ran than what Mr. Bretton ran,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you also, before that, you had to ask Mr. Bretton how to pull in the plugs. You didn't know how to do that. Remember that?
When I originally got the source file, TC Osteen and I called from my desk. We called him and he explained what plugins needed to be run.
Right, because he told you what you needed to do in terms of being able to do it so you could generate a report,
Correct.
right? You're not in any way implying or stating that Mr. Bretton is not qualified in terms of what he does or doesn't do you?
I haven't made that.
I mean, you're not here disputing his qualifications is what I'm getting at.
No,
Oh, okay. I mean, did you go, by the way, up to Cellebrite in New Jersey?
I did not.
Were you trained up in Cellebrite in New Jersey?
No.
Okay. You are aware that Mr. Bretton did go up to Cellebrite, New Jersey?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think somebody told you at some point, correct?
I think it was Investigator Osteen.
Were you aware that the defense had their own IT person too?
You had mentioned that, yes.
Okay. Did you know who that was at all?
I did not.
Okay. Were you aware of what they had done or not done in the case?
I was not.
Okay. There's been mention about deleting files. I want to make sure the record's clear. When we're talking about deleting files, we're talking about the person originally, whoever it was, Mr. Martin or whoever, actually deleting it. Is that correct?
Yes, the Cellebrite software.
Okay. Well, you're not. You're not.
Sorry, Your Honor, if he could be allowed to finish his answer.
I apologize. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
The Cellebrite system does recover deleted text messages and deleted photos from the mobile devices.
Yeah, my question is, I didn't ask you to delete anything. When you say delete, you're talking about the actual user originally.
Correct.
Right?
The text messages or the photos would have been notated as deleted because they would have been deleted from the device. And that's the information that the Cellebrite software would.
And that would be the original user. You're not stating that I asked you to delete something to prevent the defense from getting it.
That is correct.
I did not ask you.
No.
Okay. And I think at some point you did talk directly to Mr. Bratton, correct?
We had two conversations. The conversation where we called him from the 14th floor. I believe you were the one that initiated the call. I was there. TC was there.
In terms of figuring out how you could open up the...
No, that was requesting the source file originally, and then when the source file got there, we called from my office.
And I believe you would agree with your attorney, Mr. White, he's somewhere here.
Right here, counsel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
When he stood up and said that you're not saying that I did something wrong.
I did not make that acquisition, no.
Okay, all right. Thank you, I apologize, Mr. White. By the way, did you ever meet with Mr. O'Mara?
How do you mean?
Well, let's break it down. In person.
No.
Did you talk to him by phone?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that conversation you had with Mr. O'Mara.
I explained the process of downloading the information
When did you have this conversation with Mr. O'Mara?
a few days ago, I think.
Okay, tell me as best you can what day that was that you had a conversation with.
I don't recall.
Did you inform anybody in our office that you were having a conversation with Mr. O'Mara?
No.
Would that not have been a decent thing to do?
Yeah, I'm going to object. That's argumentative.
I'll object that it's not relevant, Your Honor.
The relevance is he's making an accusation, and I'll rephrase it, Your Honor. I'll be glad to. You have the right to meet with anybody, with the attorney. You didn't bother to meet with me about what you were going to testify about?
No.
Okay, was that on purpose on your part?
No.
Did Mr. White tell you not to meet with me, or Mr. Guy, or Ms. Corey, or anybody in our office?
No.
So you just made a decision not to do it?
I wasn't aware that I was supposed to. I'm not an attorney.
Well, who told you you had to meet with Mr. O'Mara?
My attorney
Mr. White told you you needed to meet with Mr. O'Mara, right?
didn't say that I needed to meet with him. He said that we were going to do a conference call.
So actually it was Mr. White and you that were on the call with Mr. O'Mara, right?
Correct.
And I gather you weren't here when Mr. White testified about that. He doesn't remember you being there.
I'm sorry, what?
Mr. White testified that you weren't there.
Your Honor, I must object because the state is mischaracterizing the evidence. That was not the testimony of Mr. White. It was never discussed.
So your objection is mischaracterization?
Mischaracterization, and he's also,
Both you speaking objection, so your objection is mischaracterization.
yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Judge, the record will speak for itself. I'll withdraw the question. Let's just make sure we have a clarification as to this. You and Mr. White had a conversation with Mr. O'Mara, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, was that just one time or more than one time?
Just that one time.
Okay, and do you recall when that was, sir?
A few days ago?
Okay. When you say a few days ago, like,
I don't recall.
was it this week?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on, I think today's Thursday.
Okay.
You think it was like yesterday or the day before or something?
I do, yes.
Okay, and was that by phone?
It was by phone,
And how was that arranged?
through my attorney.
Okay, I mean, you called Mr. White and then he told you, I want to, I'll break it down, I apologize. Did you say, I want to talk to Mr. O'Mara, can you get a hold of him, I want to explain to him what's going on? Or did Mr. White tell you, hey, listen, you need to talk to Mr. O'Mara? Or did Mr. O'Mara call you up? Do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
It was, my attorney had arranged the call.
Okay, and did you ask Mr. White, why do,
I did not tell him that I needed to talk to Mr. O'Mara.
you didn't on your own do it?
No.
Okay, so Mr. White suggested or told you you need to talk to Mr. O'Mara?
Yes.
Okay, and what else did Mr. White tell you when he told you you needed to talk to Mr. O'Mara?
That was it.
Okay, and did you ask him anything like, is that all right? Can I talk to him, or should I talk to him, or do you just rely on his advice and did it?
Relied on his advice and did it.
Did you at any time say, hey, shouldn't we talk to the state attorney's office?
No.
That never entered your mind?
An attorney.
Okay, well, that's why I'm asking. Did you ever ask Mr. White?
No.
Did he ever tell you, we're not going to go talk to the state attorney's office, by the way, because whatever reason?
No.
Okay, and you spoke to Mr. O'Mara?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us what you told Mr. O'Mara?
Basically, what it encapsulated everything that he went over when I first got up here.
Okay, so you told him the whole process, everything that you've testified about, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Did you provide Mr. O'Mara with any information?
I just said that I talked to him and told him the whole process.
I mean, physical stuff, I apologize. Let me make
No.
sure. Did you give him any information, like
No.
any files or any documents or anything like that?
No.
So if Mr. O'Mara on April 25th or whatever it was, when he was in Miami and asked witnesses about that, you would not have provided that information ahead of time?
No.
What I'm getting at is the information that you exported or whatever from the bin file, you never provided that to anybody, either to Mr. White or Mr. O'Mara?
Provided it to you.
Outside the office, outside the state attorney's office?
No.
Okay. And I gather you never gave them the information that you produced or exported from the bin file to Mr. White?
No.
Even though he was your attorney, you never provided him any information,
No.
is that correct?
It was a verbal description.
Okay. And I gather you had approved for Mr. White to come to court last time and disclose this to the court?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I mean, you knew that he was going to do that, and you told him it was all right.
I knew that he was being called, yes.
Okay, but you knew what he was going to say.
I knew that he was being called. I didn't know what he was going to say, but
I guess my question is, you're saying that the conversation you had with Mr. O'Mara was after Mr. White had already disclosed the information in court in the last hearing?
yes.
Okay, and did you watch that last hearing, and did you review Mr. White's testimony at that last hearing?
No.
You hadn't seen it at all?
I have not seen it at all.
Okay. And just for the record, you're not a forensic expert on this, in this area, is that correct?
Again, no.
Okay. And you're stating that I think you stated you expect to be fired or something, did you say that?
I said that was a concern.
And why would you be concerned about that if you haven't done anything wrong?
It's just a concern.
Okay. If we could talk about your employment at the state attorney's office. My recollection is you were formerly with the city and you used to work in our office, basically. We used to not use is a bad word. We used to rely on you to, fix computers and that kind of stuff, any technical IT issues we had. Is that correct? You were assigned from the city to work for the state attorney's office. Is that correct?
For a good number of those years, yes.
And in fact, at some point when Ms. Corey took office, she brought you on as involved in the IT area.
Yes.
Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Did you start with her employment in terms of the state attorney or soon thereafter?
I think it was 6 months after.
Okay. And you were made in charge of the whole IT area, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, recently, your title position or your duties, your responsibilities, your management has changed somewhat, has it not?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, recently, you're reporting to somebody else, correct?
Correct.
She is the fiscal director, Ms. Summers Sunsong.
Correct.
Okay. And would it be fair to say you don't get along with her?
She's been very cordial since I've been reporting to her.
Haven't you had issues with her?
How do you mean?
Well, you tell me. Isn't it true that you didn't get along with her and you didn't like her all of a sudden becoming your boss?
No, she's been very cordial since she's been my
I know.
boss.
My question is, have you had issues regarding her? Have you had disagreements with her?
Have I had disagreements with her?
Yeah. she had disagreements with you, whichever way you want to phrase it. I mean, I can sit here and ask you 20 questions, or I'm just trying to get your relationship with the person who is now your boss you're unhappy about.
I've had good conversations with her, and I've had disagreements with her, yes.
All right. But come April of this year, your duties, your responsibilities were significantly changed, were they not?
How do you mean?
Well, let's go over the significant changes. Specifically, your access to the F drive that you had total access to everybody's was curtailed or taken away, was it not?
Yes.
Okay. Before, you used to have complete access. And this is before, by the way, we even suspected or knew until we heard Mr. White testify that anything was going on. Your duties were curtailed, correct? Your responsibilities, your access. That you also were required now to get prior approval from a managing director, Ms. Peak, on any requests that were made to the city IT department, correct?
No, that wasn't my understanding.
Okay. And you were to report to a fiscal director for all purchasing and budget matters, Ms. Sanson. And before you had carte blanche, but, well, I don't want to exaggerate it, but you had more authority than you do now.
No, all the purchasing happened through the business office. I didn't do any purchasing.
Before you had 8 people that you supervised, now you only supervise one person.
It was 10 and then down to 2.
I apologize. Now it's 2, Chris King and Mario, I can't remember Mario's last name. Okay. But your duties or your authority was curtailed. Would you not agree with that?
My duties or my...
Your authority over people.
I had less people that reported to me.
Okay. And your work hours were changed. You were no longer allowed to take short lunch to shorten work day. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And you had to produce a job description of your duties.
Correct.
You also had to produce a written list of what projects were being worked on, correct?
Right.
You also had to document in writing whenever computer equipment was moved or reassigned, which wasn't previously done.
No, we did keep inventory on computer equipment.
And you also were to immediately inventory all the computers belonging to the state attorney's office because of switched and re-image computers, correct?
I wasn't told why.
Okay. Now, sir, there was also an issue that arose as a result of Mr. White's employment, correct? And former employment there, that there was some information that was disclosed of a health nature of employees. Do you recall that? Some stuff that was leaked by somebody regarding a personal matter, regarding employees in the office, regarding physical ailments, et cetera.
I wasn't told very much about that. I was told that someone's information had been on a blog.
Okay. And specifically, I, on behalf of Ms. Corey, and I believe it was Ms. Peak, brought you into the conference room, Ms. Corey's office, and we talked to you about that. You recall that? Okay, and that was around, what, April of 2013? This year?
I think it was early April, yeah.
Okay. And basically, we tried to determine who had access to that potential information that was leaked about this personal matter about an employee of the office. That's one of the things. And you're right, I don't think we specifically told you what the matters were, but we talked about information, who had access. And isn't it true that it was a determination made that you were one of the people that had access, you and a few other peoples within the IT department? And
Yes.
then also the person you mentioned earlier, the director, I guess, at that time, Mr. Commando,
Correct.
right? And some of the information that was leaked, the belief was that Mr. White had access to that information or somewhat was involved in doing that. Do you recall that?
Mr. White's name, I don't recall Mr. White being tied into that.
You don't recall Mr. White's in terms of the blogs that were put out and stuff? You don't recall his name at all?
I wasn't aware that he was the one that blogged that.
Okay.
I was never told that.
Okay, but the bottom line is, it came down to it was either you or somebody else in the office that potentially had done that, correct? Wouldn't you agree? And you stated you had not,
I think
correct?
that
I
was
want to
the-
make sure the record's clear.
I think that was the assumption, that it was
Yes.
one of 2 people.
Right. And you stated you had not done it, correct? I mean, just for purposes of the record, you stated you had not done it.
I'm still stating that I did not do
Okay,
it.
I'm just saying. And you stated also that you believe the other person that was potentially the other person that done it, you don't believe that person did it either.
No, I
I
did not.
think, right? But
Right.
you agree that information was leaked, you just didn't know who leaked it.
Right.
Would that be an accurate discussion about our discussions, you and I and Ms.
I think that's pretty close, yeah.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that you were unhappy about that discussion, or were you happy about that?
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, let's start at the very beginning. Did I treat you fairly?
Did you treat me fairly?
Yeah.
From what standpoint? I don't understand the question.
Well, I'm asking you whether you committed a violation in terms of leaking information.
Okay,
Not on this, we're not talking about this case. We're talking about something separate regarding this case.
okay.
Did I treat you fairly?
Did you treat me fairly?
Yes, sir.
I guess so, yeah.
Did Ms. Peak treat you fairly?
No, I don't think she did.
You thought she was a little too harsh regarding questioning of you?
It was a bit accusatory, yes.
Okay. But the bottom line, you were still an employee of the office, correct?
Correct?
But after having left that conference room where you were told that you or one other person was involved in leaking this because you were the ones that had access to everybody's emails, et cetera, and more importantly, personal matters that should not have been disclosed of a physical ailments of employees in the office, when you left that office, were you happy about being accused potentially of doing this?
I don't really understand the question. Was I happy that I
Yeah,
was being...
how did you feel after you left? Did you go, man, they've accused me of something I didn't do? Or did you say, boy, you know?
I felt...
Your Honor, if I may, the relevance of this is,
Is that your objection is relevant?
yes, it is,
Overruled.
and materiality, Your Honor.
How did I... please repeat that?
Sure.
Sorry.
My question is, you were brought in, you were told that you were one of two people that were involved in having access to everybody's emails, personal matters, et cetera. That information had been disclosed, and it shouldn't have been. It was illegal. Potentially, that was a crime. And you were
Okay.
questioned about that.
Right.
You recall that, right? And you stated you didn't do it. When you left that meeting, did you say, wow? How did you feel?
I felt uncomfortable.
Okay. That in no way factored in you making this allegation, or I apologize. I don't want to overstate. You have not made an allegation. A suspicion in your mind that something had not been disclosed. That action where I and Ms. Peak challenged you in terms of that in no way had anything to do with you making this, I don't want to say allegation because you haven't said it's an allegation, but suspicion or something. That had nothing to do, one had nothing to do with the other?
No.
Okay, it's just a coincidence.
Yes.
Okay. By the way, regarding the Cellebrite, I think you said you never went to Cellebrite regarding this case or at any other time, correct? Did I get that right up in New Jersey?
No, I never went to Cellebrite,
all
New
right.
Jersey.
Were you aware that the phone was taken up to Cellebrite, right? I guess you became aware of it at some point.
I think if I recall correctly, the phone was sent to California to be unlocked and
Right.
then brought to
Cellebrite,
Celebrite
okay.
by the FDLE analyst.
Yes, sir. And were you aware that the defense had an opportunity to go up there when it was being dumped and be present whatever was done up there, and they declined to do that?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
I mean, were you aware that Mr. O'Mara and Mr. West originally stated they wanted to go, but then they declined to go?
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, did you ever ask anybody, hey, like, how come the defense, you never asked me about that, did you?
No?
Okay. Did
I
you
don't
ever ask
recall.
Mr. White to ask me if you didn't want to go directly to me?
No?
Okay. And I gather you're saying that you never were actually aware whether FDLE did an actual additional report or not. After the information that you got, we turned over to FDLE. You don't know if they did or not.
I don't know if they did or not.
Okay. So you suspected that this information may have not been revealed, and you wanted to make sure that you...
Didn't have legal exposure.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And How many other cases have you been involved where you've assisted attorneys in terms of, I'm not talking about just the computer, the laptop or the stuff. I'm talking about in cases involved. How many other cases have you been involved in since you've been working for us?
Over approximately 14 years.
Okay.
I have no
Some?
idea.
I mean, okay. And how many of those have you looked to see whether discovery has been turned over or not turned over?
I don't recall any.
Okay. And I think you stated already, you stated that you thought the report was incomplete, you stated, and then when you mentioned that to me, I said, hold on, let's make sure we get everything. Do you recall that?
I don't recall you saying, let's get everything.
What did I say?
I don't recall what you said. You said, let's call I remember you wanting to call FDLE,
And get it?
and I remember that we relocated to the conference room at the other end of the 14th floor, and we called FDLE on the phone.
That's one of the times we spoke to Mr. Breton.
I don't know if that's the person. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. And by the way, the report you created was for the state attorney's office to use, in other words, like a worksheet for us to use to be able to decipher in terms of cataloging, that's my word, I may be wrong, in terms of different text messages, is that correct?
How do you mean?
The report you created was to make it easier for us, Mr. Osteen and stuff, to find like the names and that stuff in terms of categorizing them, cataloging them.
I think you're confusing your terms.
Okay.
The generate report feature, I generated the report, the same feature that FDLE would have done. My report ended up coming up bigger.
Right.
Past that, while the modules were open, I exported those modules to Excel spreadsheets, so it would be easier.
To be able to decipher in terms of where, like we wanted a particular word found, is that correct? Like a word search type
You
thing?
could then use the filter or the search feature within Excel, yes.
Okay. And now, you mentioned recently that Mr. Osteen had asked you about some evidence that defense had that you actually hadn't found, nor that had FDLE mentioned, correct?
Yes.
All right? And I think you spoke to Mr. Osteen, and by the way, let's make sure we're clear. You had not told Mr. Osteen or myself or anybody in our office that you had contacted Mr. White and had talked, and we're going to talk to Mr. O'Mara, right?
I had not planned to talk to Mr. O'Mara.
I'll rephrase the question. You had not mentioned to anybody in our office that you had talked already to Mr. White when this conversation that I'm about to ask you about occurred.
Can you give me a time frame?
Okay. Specifically, back on, I think it was May 24th, May 23rd.
Right.
We asked you, I think it was myself or Mr. Osteen asked you, that, hold on, the defense has got some documents from that bin or source file that your report didn't bring up, nor did Mr. Brenton's on FDLE. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. We said, Mr. O'Mara is disclosing stuff to the media and publishing it on his thing. We've never seen that. You recall that?
I do recall that, yes.
Okay. So that was information that Mr. O'Mara claimed he didn't have, right?
Your Honor,
And he did.
Let me object.
I'll be glad to rephrase it.
Mischaracterization.
I'll be glad to rephrase it.
Okay. Well,
You were not aware that Mr. O'Mara had that all that information.
Let me object, Your Honor. That's another mischaracterization of the evidence. He just makes it up. Well,
Please leave your commentaries out of your objections. You could cross-examine him on that issue. Do you understand the question?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay, I'll be glad to rephrase the question. I asked you about some information that Mr. O'Mara had published on his website. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And that was information that Mr. O'Mara alleged on his website that he had recovered from this victim's cell phone, Trayvon Martin's cell phone. Do you recall that?
I didn't read that part of it.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was told by you that there was information that they said that we had not turned over.
Right. And that they had, Mr. O'Mara had. You recall that?
Yeah?
Okay. And you recall me asking you to look through what you had generated for us for the state attorney's office, and also that I was going to check with Steve Brenton at FDLE where that information came from if we didn't have it.
I didn't recall that.
Okay. Do you recall talking to Mr. Osteen about it?
Yes.
And do you recall, and I didn't know that you were going to be testifying or had talked to Mr. White, asking you, please document that in some kind of email so that I would have a record because we don't have that? Do you recall that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay. You recall doing an email to me documenting what you had not previously been able to find that Mr. O'Mara had found?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall that being May 24th on a Friday?
I do.
Okay. And do you recall stating something to the effect of do you recall what you told me?
Basically, the information that was found, there was a few files, specifically with those text messages that was pointed out by Investigator Osteen, that we did not see in the text message files that I had done on my report. And
So, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
those additional files were contained in a database file for third-party applications that, it's my understanding, were loaded on the phone.
So, assuming for purposes of this question that Mr. O'Mara had published those in his GZ legal website, and he had provided that to the state in discovery, how would Mr. O'Mara have gotten that if we didn't give that information?
I would venture to say from the source file.
So Mr. O'Mara all the time had all that information there, and he was able to get it without your assistance.
Well, I don't understand.
You didn't assist him in getting that information, did you?
No, I did not.
I mean, you didn't help him at all. You didn't have Mr. White help him, did you?
No.
You didn't call FDLE and tell him to help him, did you?
No.
So somehow Mr. O'Mara had that all information, and he brought out something that you didn't find,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So from the source file, he found out documents that your ability to find didn't find, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, you had I think my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you said, oh, I've got to figure out where this came from. And you went down to your office and studied it, and then you came back and said, I figured out how they got it, correct?
Yes, that was when I explained that it had come from a third-party application.
And that would have been like a Facebook or that type of app. I think it was some other, not,
I think is the name.
right. So you were able to figure it out, but originally in your exporting of all the information from that source file or from the dump, you didn't get it,
That was my understanding.
right? Okay. If I may have a moment, Your Honor. I apologize. May I have a moment, Your Honor? You do agree that the information that you do for attorneys in the office are confidential and are supposed to remain confidential?
Yeah?
In your employment in the office, you would do work for people in like homicide, major crimes, and all facets of the office, right? Confidential information. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you understand that that requires you to keep that confidential. In other words, sometimes people's lives are at risk, like a victim of a sexual battery or whatever, correct?
Yes.
You know, gangs, that kind of stuff that we work with on a regular basis, correct?
Yes.
Public corruption, police corruption, all that kind of stuff. They're all very sensitive. Would you not agree with that?
Yes.
And disclosure can lead to harassment, intimidation of victims, destruction of evidence, that other kind of stuff.
Your Honor, if I might object on relevance and foundation in this argument.
What is the, first let's start with what is the relevance?
The relevance of this witness's knowledge of the requirements under what he's obligated to do or not do. And I'm getting right to the point, Your Honor. My point is, you thought that you had an obligation to disclose or potentially disclose something that potentially had happened. And you were upset about it, I guess, right? Because you felt that you might be criminally liable in some way, right?
I didn't know what you had turned over.
Okay.
And I was concerned that I would have legal exposure based on that.
Yes, sir. Yet you still continue to work here, or work there at the state attorney's office, and to do stuff for myself, Mr. Guy, and other people. You had no problems doing that.
No?
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And just so you know,
Yes, Your Honor. Okay. Sir, do you remember the date of the first report generated by FDLE?
I do not.
Would you agree if I told you that it was generated on February 20 or March of 2012?
Actually, the witness has already stated this.
Would you contest that if I told you that it was done in March or thereabouts of 2012?
I don't know the date.
Okay. Do you know when that was first turned over to the defense?
I do not.
If I were to tell you it was turned over 7 months later in September, do you know any information from your work at the state attorney's office to contest that it was delayed 7 months?
No.
Did Mr. De La Rionda discuss with you that the only way we found out that a report existed at FDLE and that Mr. De La Rionda was aware of was that we found that the phone actually did work during an evidence review in August of 2012?
That was not told to me, no.
He never told you that that was when we first found out about the phone?
No.
Were you part of the decision-making process to send the phone out to California to have it evaluated to try and get to some of the digital information?
I was not.
Did they ever discuss that with you?
I think I was told that by Investigator Osteen, but it was not discussed with me.
Would that be something that you would have some insight on or some assistance in accomplishing had they asked you?
We could have tried to done it in-house.
Okay. Do you have any idea why they didn't even allow you to try and do it in-house?
No.
But it was not, in fact, tried, even attempted to be accomplished through your office, was it?
Not to my knowledge.
Speaking of speaking to you about matters, did Mr. De La Rionda ever call you in the last week or so and ask to talk to you about this?
No.
Would you have spoken to him if he asked you?
Yes?
So when he suggests all these communications that I had with you, did he ever even reach out and ask to discuss with you the testimony that you might be presenting today?
You had mentioned conversations. There was one conversation that we had
And what was that?
on the phone with Wes White either a day or two ago.
Hours.
Right.
But my question is whether or not Mr. De La Rionda ever reached out to you to talk to you about this case.
Since I was put on leave?
Yes.
No.
And you were, in fact, put on leave, correct?
Correct.
You're on administrative leave presently?
Yes.
When did that happen?
I don't know the date.
The conversations that you had with Mr. De La Rionda where you had this concern regarding the disclosure of the information, that was in January of 2013, right?
I asked what would happen, and those happened in early January 2013.
And when were your duties changed?
Early April, I believe.
Do you think now, as you sit here today, that you're being pigeonholed or cubbyholed because you had information that they were concerned about getting out? So they took certain access away from you, they took certain duties away from you, and they took certain employees away from you?
I would prefer not to make those accusations.
It was clear, was it not, to Mr. that you made it clear, did you not, that you had a concern that this information was not being forwarded to the defense, and that concern was evidenced directly to Mr. De La Rionda in January. Is that accurate?
I don't understand
Sure.
the question.
Your concern that you evidenced concerning whether or not this information was being disclosed to us was back in January 2013, correct?
That's when I asked what would happen, and he said my report would be redone by FDLE, so I didn't have to testify.
And then he told you another possibility of just turning over the bin file, correct?
Yes,
And it was that led to your concern?
that is what led to my concern, yes.
Was it that you were trying to get back at Mr. De La Rionda because they had taken away certain duties from you?
No,
Did you have any anger or animosity towards Mr. De La Rionda or Ms. Corey that colored your decision-making process in dealing with this information that you found out?
no.
Would it surprise you to know, you don't have the first FDLE report with you, do you?
I do not.
Would it surprise you to note that the information that Mr. De La Rionda asked you about, the text message about buying a gun, actually existed in the February 22nd or February 2012 report?
No?
Okay. You had a conversation with me a couple of days ago regarding your potential testimony, correct?
Correct.
And tell the court how I steered your testimony in a certain direction.
I don't think that you steered my testimony at all.
Did I suggest answers to you?
No?
Did I say to you, this is my chance, I want you to say this about Mr. De La Rionda?
No.
Did I say to you anything that impacted on the truth or the veracity of your testimony here today?
No?
There were concerns that Mr. De La Rionda mentioned about release of certain information. He talked about some medical records. Were there other concerns about financial information that you were questioned about?
I don't recall financial information, no.
Was there information that you were asked about whether or not you knew or could identify who released information about retirement funding?
That was one of the concerns, yes.
What was that?
That information had been leaked. Basically, that a public records request was done specific to that information right at the time that it happened. And I believe that was told by Ms. Corey.
And so you were told that somebody had made a public records request for information about the retirement funding increases?
Correct.
And Ms. Corey told you what?
She told me that the information was found via a public records request.
Okay. Did she question whether or not you yourself had released the information?
No, she said that she didn't think that I had done it.
Did she question whether or not you could find out if anybody else in the office had done that release?
I'm sorry, the question again?
Did she ask you whether or not you forensically could identify whether or not anybody else had emailed out information about that or somehow released it?
I believe that investigation was done through the city of Jacksonville.
Did you create an email showing sort of screenshots of the first report from FDLE and your report?
I did.
And tell the court what the purpose of that was.
To notate the significant differences between the two.
Who was that forwarded to?
It was sent to Investigator Osteen and copied to Mr. De La Rionda.
And did Mr. De La Rionda give you any instructions concerning what to place and not to place in the subject concerning what it referenced?
No, I sent that email.
What did you fill in? What the subject was?
File differences?
And did you put in a case name?
No, I did not.
Why not?
So that it wouldn't have specific case information in the email.
Why not?
It was basically more or less office policy to not have things in writing.
So it's the office policy of the State Attorney's Office in the Fourth Judicial Circuit not to identify public record emails by case name?
I have been told in the past to not put specifics into an email.
Did that email make it apparent? Do you know approximately when that email was sent?
January 23rd?
Did that email make it apparent to the recipients of it that there were significant differences between the FDLE initial report and yours?
There were less folders in one compared to the other.
Did you know that a hearing was held on April 30th, 2013 on this specific request for information regarding reports from the cell phone?
I knew that there was a hearing. I didn't know that that was what it was for.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, May. Mr. Kruibdos, be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.